I'm really pleased to be speaking to Professor Hardy Vogtmann, who was, of course, the first professor in the world in organic agriculture and who has been in contact with the Henry Doubleday Research Association almost ever since the beginning. So really, really great to have the opportunity to talk to you. Please tell me how you I suppose about your initial contacts with Lawrence Hills and with the Henry Doubleday Research Association.
The initial contact was, he is the comfrey man.
Yes.
That's the man who does all with comfrey, and I was very interested to learn more about it because I thought it's always also useful for agriculture, not just for horticulture.
Yes, of course.
And that's when I met him, and in his shorts, like the usual way.
Yeah.
And we were acquainted, and then we visited several times when I was in Great Britain a lot. But he became the member of the IFOAM, and I was IFOAM president at that time.
Right.
So he did a lot within the organic international agricultural movements. A lot. He was a real cornerstone for us because he represented the home gardeners, which at that time were outside the organic movement.
Yeah.
And he was the voice for it, and that's why he was really also very much accepted.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because we've obviously concluded that because the Henry Doubleday Research Association had that niche, because Lawrence had that niche of working with organic gardeners, he brought something quite unique to the worldwide organic movement. And do you think he did have some influence on the movement in that way?
I think very much, because after all, he had a big constituency throughout the world. Throughout the world, don't forget this.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and his experience especially was very important for us on a small scale. Following Schumacher's Small is Beautiful.
Yeah.
We could adopt a lot of his experience and knowledge, also with pest control, into the bigger picture, into the bigger gardening pictures, but also agriculture. And I personally was always hoping that comfrey was going to solve some of our problems in agriculture.
Well, I think it did. I mean, there were a lot of early experiments using comfrey as an animal feed, of course, for goats and all sorts of animals. I mean, the work on comfrey obviously dwindled out, was reduced when it was no longer to be able to be used as a sort of medicinal purposes. But we have continued with the work on comfrey, particularly as a fertility building crop, in that it is able to capture a lot of particularly potassium, and therefore using it as a fertility builder
I tell you, in every home organic garden in Germany you find comfrey.
Yeah, and if that comfrey is Bocking 14, which it normally is, then I think that is really an innovation that can be attributed to the Henry Doubleday, or to Lawrence Hills and the Henry Doubleday Research Association, because he was, of course, the one who sort of brought the different types of comfrey together and started to...
He was our comfrey man.
That's brilliant. Okay. And the approach was obviously to work through sort of innovating new techniques, innovating comfrey, with his view to try to develop the techniques that could be used in organic gardening. So it was very much sort of an experimentation, and as you are very familiar with, the organisation was first set up to have these sort of clubs of teams who've actually worked on different topics. So it's been through what we nowadays, 60 years later, call citizen science.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what do you think that is what is your view on the approach of using citizen science, if you like, or engaging people in science to in terms of engaging with people, being grassroots development of a whole movement?
I think it's very important. If you think that we have so-called red lists for endangered species, plants and animals, that depends very much on citizen science. All the people going out, counting burns, looking at plants, reporting back, all that is citizen science. It wasn't called that way, but we are very much dependent. For example, nature conservation depends very much on the feedback from that. And the same is, as you said, in gardening. We have experience in, especially now with immigrants, going into those gardening groups, gardening clubs, going in there, learn something about our culture, learn the language. And we had done some research where we found, okay, number 1 was being among people, secondly, learn the language, learn about the culture, and only number 4 was producing food. So you see, it's beyond just growing food. And I think at that time, what many people didn't realize, those gardens are the best background for a lot of biodiversity.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they have a lot of different species, a lot of different pollen at different times of the year. So it is really plentiful for the insects. So the insect population in those gardens is great. And we found from our studies the greatest biodiversity in those gardens run organically, not conventionally with pesticides and herbicides.
So it's a good way for connecting with people, and what we nowadays know is really important, connecting people to nature, actually taking part in nature activities, and that will bring important benefits to the people.
But it will also bring benefits to us as NGOs, to put enough pressure on the politicians, say, hey, listen, there's many people around. They have realized how important it is, how important biodiversity is, how important birds are. You do something about it.
Yes, no, absolutely, that's great.
So getting pressure from people doing citizen science on the scientific community. Hey, look at this some closer.
And obviously Lawrence started with citizen science because that was the only way he could do the science. He wasn't, we always say he wasn't the rich person. He couldn't buy a research station and employ lots of researchers. So he had to engage with people. And of course, all through, really up until I would say 10, 15 years ago, citizen science wasn't really recognised in the science area.
No, it wasn't even talked about.
No, it wasn't even talked, and it was a bit dismissed, wasn't it, that you couldn't do it that way. But finally now we've come to a time when actually the citizen science activities are really recognised much more widely. And where I think it really worked is that because it was done by the members and themselves, or people, the gardeners themselves, it works really well in that it is a combination of both the scientific development but also the technology transfer. So there was a fantastic uptake of all the research findings, which we find in no other research situation. I mean, we always find a great lag between research in agriculture and the uptake of that findings amongst farmers. But because it all happened here in one go, the transfer of technology and the use of the findings was just happened really quickly.
Because of this, Lawrence had a big advantage. He was never in the ivory tower of research. He was not dependent on publishing in international referee journals. He didn't depend on that.
No, that's
right.
And
that was his strength. And I think now with intradisciplinary research, that has become clear. We need all stakeholders involved. So it has been a long way for the scientists to realize.
And we would also claim that he was not only Lawrence, he wasn't really a scientist from the beginning, was he? But he was a very good grower, but he was also a very good communicator. He was, of course, a journalist from the beginning. So he really could, he wrote about the results as quickly as they came in and really spread it very
Which a
wide.
scientist would never have done, because they would have been scared that somebody comes along and says, hey, this is not 100% correct.
And of course he worked for the national newspapers, so he could write about the results in his magazine, or in the national newspapers, which is unheard of today, that you can get a piece in there. So there was obviously the combination of that really worked. But that's great. Have you any other thoughts on what it?
No, I think what is very important that this is kept up. Maybe more structured, a little bit more structured, more guidance. But I think it is very important. And the second point is, once you have all the data, you have to make sense out of it. You collect it and then really have you can draw conclusions. You don't need statistics p 0.01.
No. You
don't need that. You don't need that. That's what scientists always need, but you don't need this. I mean, if you have from 20 people, even 10 saying this was successful for us.
And I think what we have, having looked at the over 500 experiments that's been carried out over the last 60 years, is that there are very rarely one experiment that has very conclusive results, but it's accumulation of the experiments, and it's the repeat of many of the ideas. They do an experiment, it shows sort of some indications, and then we adapt it a little bit, of the technique a bit and continue with it. And over the time, there are real innovations. So they often come from repeating and adapting the sort of the trial and the techniques.
But is not also the advantage that you have it worldwide under entirely different cultures, different soils, different climate conditions?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, who else has that?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously much more citizen science, particularly in relation to observing nature. So, observing insects, and that's obviously a great benefit that you can do that over the whole country or over the whole or in different parts of the world. But it's also important when you develop a new weed control strategy that it works under different farming system. So the fact that we can have 500 or sometimes even 1,000 people taking part really adds to the sort of the bulk of the learning from it.
Absolutely, yes.